The ground was never just dirt. It was memory. It was blood. Every drop of oil pulled from beneath it came with a price, and the men who took it, they never stopped paying. The wind moves across the empty fields, carrying dust and whispers of voices long gone. The land stretches endlessly, cracked and dry, like a scar that never healed. Once, these plains roared with life, the noise of drills biting into earth, trucks rumbling down muddy roads, and men shouting orders over the sound of machines. Now, all that's left is silence, a silence so deep it feels like the earth itself is holding its breath. There was a time when men believed they ruled this land. They built their empires out of steel and fire, turning deserts into gold. Oil was their crown, and greed was their god. They thought they could tame the earth, force it to give up its secrets, make it bleed for them. But the land doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. Every barrel that rose from the wells carried stories of broken promises, of families torn apart, of power bought with lies. The empire stood tall once, shining under the sun, its towers built on foundations of deceit. But beneath that shine, the ground was cracking. Men who stood shoulder to shoulder began to turn on each other. Partners became rivals, and rivals became enemies. When the first well ran dry, panic followed. When the second exploded, fear took its place. But the real damage was never in the flames. It was in the faces of the people who had given everything: their time, their youth, their souls, for the promise of something that was never theirs to keep. The land was patient. It waited while men fought and fell. It watched as greed poisoned their hearts, as their names were written on contracts soaked in ambition. And when the time came, the earth took back what was hers. The rigs rusted, the fields turned to dust, and the empire that once stood unshakable began to crumble. But even as the machines stopped, something darker started to rise. In the corners of those forgotten towns, where the smell of oil still lingers in the air, new shadows began to move. The children of the fallen, the ones who watched their fathers lose everything. They grew up not with dreams of power, but with the taste of revenge. They remember how it ended, how those who ruled the rigs walked away rich, leaving others to bury their dead. They remember the sound of explosions in the distance and the smell of smoke in the wind. They remember every name, every debt left unpaid. The empire might have fallen, but its ghosts still walk the dirt roads. Every gust of wind carries their anger. Every flicker of light from a distant town holds their memory. The land may seem quiet, but beneath it, something is moving slow, heavy, and full of fury. The story isn't over. It never was, because what was built on blood can only fall in blood. And in this land, no one escapes what they've sown. The land doesn't stay quiet for long. Out here, silence is just the sound that comes before the storm. After the empire fell, its ruins didn't disappear. They changed hands. The oilfields, the machines, the broken towns, all became trophies for the next generation of dreamers and thieves. New names painted over old signs. New money chasing the same black gold. They came dressed in new suits, driving new trucks, speaking with new promises. They said they would rebuild, bring back the jobs, clean up the mess the old kings left behind. But under every handshake was the same hunger, the same need to own, to control, to rise. The empire might have burned, but greed never dies. It just learns to wear a different mask. The new kings didn't build their power with steel and sweat. They built it with paper, with numbers and signatures. The land wasn't just earth to them, it was a ledger, a way to measure worth in barrels and billions. They drew new borders, carved new deals, and told the world that this time, things would be different. But the ghosts of the old world don't rest easy at night. The wind still carries their names. The ones who vanished when the wells dried. The ones who were buried without markers. The ground still trembles where explosions once ripped through the dark. And when the drills start again, the earth groans like an old beast remembering pain. Some say it's just the machines. Others know better. In the small towns nearby, you can see what's left behind. The old bar still stands, its walls covered with dust and the stories of men who never came back. The diner serves coffee that tastes like memory. The waitress still wears her hair the same way she did 20 years ago, waiting for someone who won't return. The world has moved on. But these places haven't. They're stuck in the shadow of what was lost. The new kings don't visit these towns. They stay far from the noise of broken lives. Their meetings happen in tall buildings miles away, where the floors shine and the windows never open. They talk about progress, about sustainability and innovation. Words that sound clean, sharp, and empty. They speak of the future like it belongs only to them. But in the distance, there's another kind of gathering. Not in boardrooms, in barns, in garages, in the back corners of bars where no one asks questions. The sons and daughters of those who were betrayed are watching. They see the new empires being built on the same dirt that swallowed their families. They know the stories, every lie, every deal, every man who walked away untouched while others bled. They call themselves many things: activists, workers, protectors, but beneath every name lies the same truth. They don't want justice. They want reckoning. They want to make the land remember again. As night falls over the oil fields, the lights flicker like dying stars. The wind rises, carrying the smell of rain and something else: metal, smoke, maybe fate. The new kings sleep easy, thinking they've learned from the past. But the ground beneath them stirs. The ghosts they tried to bury are waking. The empire fell once because of greed. This time, it might fall because of vengeance. And when that happens, no amount of money, no promise, no power will be enough to stop what's coming. Because in this land, history doesn't repeat itself, it reloads. It began quietly. No explosion, no warning, no fire lighting up the horizon, just a small crack in the system, a number that didn't add up, a message that went unanswered, a silence in a place that was never silent. That's how empires fall. Not with thunder, but with whispers that no one listens to. The oil kept flowing, but the money started to disappear. Papers were forged, signatures faked, promises rewritten. The same men who spoke of loyalty at dawn were signing betrayals by dusk. They told themselves it was business, just numbers on a screen. But behind those numbers were people, men working 12 hours a day in the heat, women waiting for checks that never came, towns built on lies that were finally running out of fuel. At first, everyone denied it. The leaders smiled on camera, shaking hands, pretending everything was under control. A temporary issue, they called it, a fluctuation in the market. But you can't lie to the land. The wells began to cough, the ground started to tremble, and soon the fires came. One by one, the rigs went dark, the machines stopped humming. The empire that once lit up the night now stood silent under a sky thick with smoke. When the first collapse happened, it wasn't on the news. It was in the hearts of the workers who realized they were the last ones left. They stood in the dust, staring at towers they had built, watching them rust and fall. Some cursed the company, some cursed themselves, others said nothing at all. There's a special kind of grief that comes when the thing you gave your life to turns to ashes. Right in front of you, the bosses fled first. They always do. They packed their wealth into offshore accounts and private jets, leaving behind empty offices and unpaid wages. What they didn't know was that the world they built was already collapsing behind them. Files leaked, names surfaced. The same greed that made them kings was now turning them into prey. Every day brought new headlines. Massive scandal in the oil sector. Investigations launched into corporate corruption. Environmental damage beyond repair. Each one cut deeper, peeling away the mask until all that remained was the raw truth. An empire built on deception, finally crumbling under its own weight. But the collapse wasn't just in numbers or headlines. It was personal. Fathers who had built their lives around those rigs came home broken. Mothers who waited for years for better days stopped believing they would come. Children who grew up dreaming of working the fields now looked at them as graves. In the midst of ruin, the land began to take back what it was owed. The weeds grew tall over the pipelines. The wind carried away the dust of what once was power. The oil, once black gold, turned into poison, seeping into rivers, staining everything it touched. It was as if the earth was reclaiming its due, punishing those who thought they could own her. The empire fell slowly, painfully, until there was nothing left but memories. Buildings once filled with ambition stood hollow, windows shattered, papers flying like ghosts. The same men who had built their thrones on oil now hid from the cameras, hunted by the truth they buried. The same people who worshipped them now cursed their names. But in every fall, there's always someone watching from the shadows, someone who learns. Among the ruins, the survivors gathered. They didn't wear suits or carry titles. They had dirt on their hands, scars on their faces, and fire in their eyes. They saw what greed had done, what lies had cost. And as the empire burned, they made a promise: never again. Yet promises are fragile things in a land like this. Because even when the empire falls, the hunger doesn't die. It just waits, buried beneath the ashes, whispering to those who come next. The flames might fade, the towers might crumble, but the story doesn't end here. Something else is rising from the wreckage, something older, stronger, and far more dangerous. Because when the empire falls, blood rises. The rain came the night after the last tower fell, heavy, cold, and endless washing over the burned fields. The shattered glass, the bones of the empire that once ruled the horizon. For the first time in years, the sky looked clean, but the land below it wasn't. The dirt still reeked of oil and smoke. And somewhere in that black mud, anger began to breathe again. The fall didn't end the story. It rewrote it. What was lost didn't vanish, it transformed. The ones left behind started moving in the dark. Quietly, carefully. No banners, no speeches, no headlines. Just a slow gathering of hands hardened by labor and hearts poisoned by betrayal. They didn't call themselves heroes. They didn't need to. Every scar on their bodies was already a story, a reminder of what had been taken from them. At first, it was small. A missing truck here, a document gone from a locked drawer there. Then an oil line burst under mysterious conditions. Then another. Machines stopped working. Generators failed. The same land that once obeyed the powerful now turned against them. It wasn't nature this time, it was people. People who knew every inch of this soil, every pipe, every secret path under the rigs. People who once built the empire, now tearing it apart from its roots. The new kings, the ones who had survived the collapse, began to feel the walls closing in. Their meetings grew tense. Their voices shook behind closed doors. They hired guards, they built fences. They watched the horizon like men expecting ghosts. But the ghosts they feared weren't supernatural. They were flesh and blood. They were the workers, the sons, the forgotten, the blood that had once fueled the empire, now turning against it. The attacks grew bolder. Entire fields went up in flames. Storage tanks exploded in the night, painting the sky red. The fires weren't random, they were messages. Each one burning closer, each one louder than the last. The old bosses started to realize what was happening too late. Their empire hadn't just fallen. It was being hunted. In the chaos, rumors spread like wildfire. Some said a group called the Black Vein had formed an underground network of workers, engineers, and outcasts seeking revenge. Others whispered of a nameless leader, a man born in the fields, raised in the dust, who promised to bleed the system dry. No one had seen his face, but everyone knew his words. They took from the earth. Now the earth takes back. The government tried to intervene, sending officials, police, and soldiers into the wastelands. But they didn't understand what they were stepping into. This wasn't just rebellion. It was the land itself, rising through its people, through their rage, through the history buried under every footprint. You can't negotiate with ghosts. You can't silence the soil. One night the wind carried the sound of chanting across the oil field. It wasn't loud, but it was steady, a heartbeat rising from the dark. The flames in the distance flickered like signals, spreading across the horizon. What began as whispers had become war, not fought with guns or tanks, but with fire, sabotage, and the truth that could no longer be buried. The media called it chaos. The rich called it terrorism. But to the ones who had lost everything, it was justice. Not the kind found in courtrooms or speeches, the kind written in ash, carved into the bones of the land. As the empire's leaders fled one by one, their mansions burned behind them. Helicopters rose into the night sky, carrying men who once called themselves untouchable. But no one escapes the land. The wind follows, the smoke trails behind, and the guilt never lets go. When dawn came, the fields were still burning. The air shimmered with heat and silence. Among the ashes, the people stood, not as kings, not as victims, but as survivors. The fire reflected in their eyes wasn't just destruction, it was rebirth. The land was no longer chained. The empire was gone. What remained was something raw and real, the pulse of those who refused to kneel again. The blood that once soaked the earth now flowed through new veins. Stronger, wiser, unbroken. The same soil that birthed greed had now given rise to vengeance, and from that vengeance, something like freedom began to grow. The empire fell, but the story of the land had only begun. Because here, power doesn't live forever, but the blood always rises.